Us warmly welcome you to this afternoon's Business Map webinar funded by the Department for Education. Today's webinar is a Zoom webinar, so a slightly different format than you may be used to. So you are all on mute, and we unfortunately cannot see you because of the high numbers that we have on today's webinar, but please do use the Q&A or the chat function if you can to contribute your ideas, thoughts, questions and comments, and we will review those and use them in the Q&A sessions. There's 2 Q&A sessions in today's webinar. And if you can't use the chat or the Q&A function, do email us at info@hempsels.com and we will do our best to include your comments. So I'm joined today by my colleagues Joe Pringle and Barbara Wilson, and by 4 local authorities who are going to be sharing their approaches and their experiences. From Derby, from Bexley, from Gloucestershire and from Portsmouth. I'm thrilled to see over 400 of you booked on for today's session, and I can see the numbers are still rising, and I'm sure people will come and go during this afternoon. We aim to finish by 3 o'clock this afternoon, so it is a packed 2.5-hour session, but we do have a break of around 10 minutes around 1:30, 1:35, but there's plenty for us to do in that 2.5 hours. I think most, if not all of us, have been dedicating a lot of time and energy and resource to supporting providers this year, even more than we're used to, and of all types. And there's been a strong focus this year on supporting business, the business functions of early years and childcare providers. All of us want to make sure that we are able to reach in meaningful ways every early years and childcare provider with the support, the information that they need and want, that's impactful and that's useful for them. Business support isn't always easy. I've been doing business support in early years and childcare for 30 years, helping people set up, develop, sustain and change provision. And it's really important that we deliver work in a sensitive and bespoke way that meets the needs of all providers. The current context places a different perspective on the support that people need and the support that we need to provide. So just a few organisational issues for today's session before it kicks off. As I've said, it's a Zoom webinar, so a slightly different format than you might be used to. Please do use the chat and the Q&A function. As you were informed at point of booking, this session is being recorded, and a recording of this session will be made available shortly after today, so that those people unable to attend are able to watch the webinar, but also you may want to revisit parts of it or indeed show parts of it to colleagues or to providers themselves. So the aim of today's webinar is to introduce a business map, and it's a new tool that we've developed to support you in the business support that you may be offering for your providers. We aim for you to be a little bit more confident and effective in how business support is delivered locally as much as possible. And so DfE have asked us to share our experience and to develop the tool that we call Business Map, and some other resources that accompany the business map, as well as providing you with a reminder of what resources already exist and where those might be and what other information we can signpost you to. We really do want you to feel able to help providers with their business planning and to balance their quality, their safety and their sustainability, so that the main issues are understood and that there are clear ideas about what support is out there and what information is out there. We place that within the context of the local authority's childcare market management role. Some of you may feel that business support is not really core to your role, or is another add-on. It might actually be a recent add-on to your role. And so we're aiming to provide a structure and a process that will be useful for even the most experienced business support person, or somebody new to that role, or somebody who thinks actually that's something that can be integrated in small but effective ways into your day-to-day role and work with providers. And to do that, we're going to give you the business map resource, and to get that resource at the end of today's webinar, you need to complete the online evaluation. There'll be a link right at the end, towards the end. It's only like 2 or 3 questions for you to answer, and one of those is, what is your name and which local authority are you from? So it's a very easy evaluation, and at the end of that evaluation there's a link for you to be able to find the business map, the slides and notes from today, and other things. So I definitely encourage you to do that. So what's changed? What's changing? Well, I think the easy answer to that is everything. There's so much change and uncertainty in any aspect of business, in any sector across the country, if not the world at the moment. Business planning is so indelibly linked with marketing and keeping on top of market dynamics. So, you know, what do families need? What do families demand? What are they asking for? What do they want? What are they preferring? And what are funders wanting to purchase, and how are funders wanting to purchase early years and childcare? We know this is a huge issue right now, and we know a lot of you will be working on and with providers around making sense of where we are today and this week. So it's important that we all understand what has changed recently, what is changing, and what might change in the future. And to do that, we all need to use what good research is out there to make sense of what people are understanding is happening, but very much value our own experiences as well around what we can see, hear, understand and feel around the change that's happening, because it affects every aspect of our roles and of providers' business models and their finance models. We are absolutely focused on supporting providers to continue to be able to deliver, to understand and respond to family preferences, to be confident in business delivery, and make sure they meet needs and demands. I think few businesses now are anything like they were a year ago today. Every business has had to change, and I know from personal experience the processes that we've needed to go through, some of those easy, some of those difficult. So we need to include these processes in our business planning and our support. Things like employment levels, population changes, birth rates, new housing, changing employment patterns, different working practices, all remain highly relevant now, as they did before this year, and they will remain relevant in future months and years. And I think it's important to acknowledge that some providers and businesses are growing and busier than ever before, or they're starting up. They are opening up new services, but others are less busy, and some are very worried about their business futures. The world of work is vitally important to the childcare market. We as a sector help families to think about entering employment, to stay in employment, and to further their careers, as well as balance their work and home lives. And as I've been speaking, clearly the past 12 months has changed the labour market in very many ways. Schemes like the coronavirus job retention scheme and self-employment income support and others from government have offered vital lifelines to the sector. And some of those have been extended, some of those are coming to an end. What will happen after these national inputs and funding schemes will remain to be seen. But there's lots of forecasts and research and forward-looking reports that perhaps predict growing unemployment or changes in unemployment, changes in work preferences. It's hard to predict the impact of those, but all of us need to be thinking about how it affects our local market and the people that we're working with as customers, as families, as children. Changes like online working, like today, mean that we're all working and behaving in different ways and in different locations, and that has a direct impact on childcare provision. More and more people now working at home, potentially for quite some time to come. So there's some behavioural changes there, as well as some government restrictions to how people may behave. And that's why we use the word preferences quite a lot, in terms of how might people change their preferences and the way in which they organise their lives and need childcare in the future. So the impact on parental demand is a really important consideration. They're significant for actual use of childcare, the levels of paid for childcare provision on top of what is funded, and they will directly affect and are directly affecting demand for funded entitlements, universal 2-year-olds and 30 hours. So it's difficult to predict that long-term parental demand. We might have started this term thinking back to autumn, thinking how things might have happened, and we might have expected a slow incremental increase of demand as we saw in autumn. But the new national lockdown has changed that quite a bit. We might have seen different nuances or subcategories of behaviour. We might have seen universal being okay, but 2-year-old provision being less in demand. Or we may have seen certain parts of our community being more anxious or less willing to bring their children into provision. Provision may be in school, which then becomes affected by messaging around whether schools are open or not. So families are rethinking their childcare needs on a daily basis. So that presents lots of challenge when it comes to managing a business. They may also be more able to share childcare between parents working at home or working more flexibly, or grandparent care may be more or less available as well. There's so many factors that are affecting the business and financial models in the sector. And one of those factors, of course, is confidence. We've all noticed parents' anxieties around using childcare outside the home as a main barrier to take up. We saw that in the early days of 2-year-olds, encouraging parents of young children to share the childcare and to bring children into provision when they hadn't done before. And whilst confidence was growing in autumn term, of course, recent lockdown restrictions have brought anxieties more to the forefront from the sector and from parents. So to help, providers and local authorities have done an enormous and incredible job in changing, adapting, bringing in new safety procedures, routines, following guidance, updating and adapting and changing as guidance changes. And provider business confidence is also affected by their not knowing what will happen next. So what's happening last week, this week, and next? Those things are all massive challenges for the sector and need to be incorporated into how we offer business support. So my final slide as part of our introduction is what this business support challenge is. That's the context and that's where we've got to, but it's, of course, childcare is key in our economic recovery. The challenge is that there is a big need for business support. and we all need to adapt and change the approach to meet current needs. We need to be confident and build business support into all of our work and all of our contact with providers. We may be focused on quality or SEND, but we need to include a business aspect of that too, because you can't have quality or inclusive provision if you don't have provision. Provision needs to be resourced and sustainable. And we recommend a framework of 4 things. And I know many of you have taken on board that framework in your COVID response strategies throughout this year and have incorporated it into your childcare sufficiency assessments and other things. And that 4-part framework is around making sure that everybody has the information they need to be able to make their own business decisions. Many providers need very little from us in terms of business support beyond information, and a little bit of information can go an awful long way. The trick is for it to be clear, simple, accessible, and up to date, and that in current times can feel like a full-time job. But others need more than that. They need tools and resources. They need things that fit the way in which they work and give them the processes that they can use, like the ones we're going to share today, and like the ones that we signpost from some of the national sector organisations as well. But not everybody engages with tools and resources. So support, in general terms, is the 3rd part of our framework, that general or universal support needs to be available on demand, so that builds skills and confidence, and that can be delivered through training and support or by answering the phone. We know demand for that is high at the moment. And then finally, a little bit more intensive is targeted interventions. So being able to respond to crises, urgent issues, problems, and intensive support needs. If you get the first 3 of those right, then you're going to be more likely to reduce the demand for targeted interventions. But targeted interventions can be very difficult to predict. So let's think about today's session in terms of information, tools and resources, support and targeted intervention, and how business support can be part of all of our work in early years and childcare to support businesses in the sector to balance quality, safety, sustainability, and keep revisiting their business and finance models. So that's context, that's setting the scene. For the rest of the session, I'm going to be very much supported by colleagues Jo Pringle and Barbara Wilson, and we're going to have examples from 4 different local authorities. Do please ask questions all the way through, because there's 2 Q&A slots, as you'll have seen on the agenda. And just a reminder that you will be receiving the slides and the notes and the business map at the end of today's session, once you've completed that short online evaluation survey. So let's hear more about the business map, what it is and how it is structured. And I'm really delighted to be introducing my colleague Jo Pringle, who, and I'm always saying it at the moment, I challenge anybody to find someone who's done more business support delivery than Jo this year. She spent an enormous amount of time online with giving information sessions, training workshops, and one-to-one confidential support with individual providers. And it's Jo who's the architect of the business map. And I'm delighted to hand over to her now.
Thank you very much, James. We all know that managing early years or childcare setting is a complex task. Some of us because of personal experience, most of us because we've been supporting the sector for quite some time. And it always has been through all the years that we've been doing it. The business map uses tried and tested steps. It's a journey, really. What we've tried to do is create a journey to support businesses to review themselves. It sets out process to identify opportunities and risks and hopefully turn them in due course through going through the process into planning. The business map has been developed and informed through the delivery, as James has said, of many sessions during the last few months. But before that, through all the work that we've done and that you've done in policy implementation over the last 10, 15 years. It's been informed by and has a lot of the elements have been run past and tested through many childcare providers of all different sorts, large, small, group and home-based settings. By completing the business map, hopefully most of the issues affecting early years and childcare businesses and those also arising from the pandemic, which add another layer on at this current moment, can be considered carefully. We hope it will be a tool that be useful to dip in and out of for experienced and effective business managers, but also those new to the role, but also a tool that officers and partners who work with them can use and will be able to use part of, some of, or all of it in a variety of different ways. The business map sets out the information to consider and collate, ultimately leading to a business plan. The aim is to take from investigation and collation to a plan of action. There are 6 things to do in the business map. The 6 steps are designed to, 1, support a timely analysis of the current business position. Where are we now? Understand what's going on around us and understand the things that have an impact and effect on our business. To provide ideas and suggestions, tools, and as James has said, links to the other resources and information that are out there from PACey, from NDNA, from the Early Years Alliance, who all have created useful tools that can be used alongside this. To support action planning for now and future months, so to think about where we are now, but also to think about what the future looks like, and hopefully embed a regular process of review. The business map starts off by looking at what's changing. Looking at demand and occupancy currently will help providers and you working with providers to establish take-up trends, identify unpopular days or sessions, and recognise emerging changes in parental preferences and patterns. If we continue to do the same, we only end up in the same place. So it's about thinking about what is changing, and hopefully it will help to identify choices for what providers might want to do next. The first activity is around analysing actual occupancy. The illustrations in the business map provide a formula to work out accurate occupancy figures. We start off with thinking about maximum occupancy and maximum capacity. That is the most that the providers could achieve under the operational figures that they choose to work with. But we know that not all providers fill all places all year round, and many providers never achieve 100% occupancy. Most providers operate at occupancy levels that grow throughout the academic year by the nature of what we do, with a September start through to a July, August finish. In many cases, settings may be full at the end of the summer, but others might reach between 70 and 85%, maybe higher, maybe lower, because they choose to, or because of what's going on in the local authority area with population, changes, or sufficiency. We need providers to be using usual, typical, average, all really things that say the same thing for their financial forecasts, for their break even and for fee structures. So we've given them the tools to enable them to work this out. Setting budgets based on average occupancy, covering 100% expenditure, will mean that every hour sold above the average occupancy level will be profit or surplus, depending on which you choose to call it. As well as this, this section of the business map provides a number of other tables to analyse current capacity and occupancy, and it also supports providers to think about occupancy moving forward and forecasts for 2021. Many of you will have seen a version of this over the summer, something that we used as part of reopening and have amended and changed as we've gone through the last 10 months as things have changed. We know parental preferences have always changed and have developed, driven by policy, new entitlements, local changes, sufficiencies and markets, including 2-year-olds, 30 hours, 12 to 15 hours, etc. But COVID has rapidly and dramatically changed parental preferences further. The decisions that parents and families are making about early education and childcare are very fluid and open to change, and somewhat unpredictable. The business map explores if there are changes in work patterns and preferences, and if and how changes in demand are in fact affecting each business. Providers are asked to think about how these changes have reshaped parental requests, their preferences, their needs, their behaviours, and the things that they're wanting. It takes a reflective look at what are the biggest changes, what impact is this having on the business. It considers what's easy to change, might be just introducing a half-hour earlier start, might be a half hour at the end of the day, might be moving to a 2.5-day model. But it also asks about what feels difficult, if not impossible. And for some providers who have seen significant changes in take-up and preferences, there will be things that are difficult, and there might be things that currently feel impossible. Taking time to really unpick what is happening in the user group or within their community will provide all the information which will be used later in the process to help providers to identify and mitigate risks. Now we've unpicked occupancy demand, parental preferences, and what's changing, the business map provides a number of other tools to help understand where the business is now. It's about finding out more, really getting to grips with what is happening within the business and around. All the tools within the Finding Out More can be used independently as one-off tools, or they can be used as a whole review process. So you won't be surprised to find out that within that process there's a SWOT analysis, and we've included a pest analysis, so that providers can reflect on internal elements of the business, things like staffing and management, the things that they're good at, the things that maybe are opportunities that they could explore, and to consider the wider environment in which their business operates. So things like the local economy and what is happening, and employment, which are really crucial for them at this precise moment. So they can think about how these are affecting and could impact on future service delivery. There's an element within there about market analysis. It talks providers through some of the data sources that they can draw on to inform their decisions. And Barbara and we'll touch a little bit on this a little bit later. So we reference local authority childcare sufficiency assessments and the information that you collect and collate and how this can be used. Population data and forecasts, demographics, new housing, local employment, and other provision in the market, all key things that they should be considering and all things that are informing their decision. All early education and childcare businesses need to know their break-even point and their break-even hourly rates. Their break-even point, for many of you in the room, know that that is the point when expenses and revenue match. Their break-even point is what we should be used to drive and to inform fee structures, anything that they are going to discount or any choices that they're making about what they choose to charge. Understanding the hourly break-even rate will ensure that the fees that are generated can contribute to a surplus or profit to reinvest in business. The illustration in the business map provides a step-by-step guide through and the mathematics so that everyone understands the formula. Understanding the how-to is important, but for those providers who would prefer to use calculators or spreadsheets to do that for them, there are several links to the work that Pacey, the NDNA Business Tools, and the group provide, one that Pacey has done as well. Once the cost analysis is completed and the break-even hourly rate is identified, providers are asked to think about what has changed. Once they know what their money is now, think about what has changed from last year. How have annual increases in costs or lower occupancy figures affected their break-even hourly rate? And we give them a cash flow forecast tool to enable them to look back and to see what's happened over the last year, but also a cash flow tool to project forward if they haven't got a simplistic tool. Developed from work that local authorities done and have developed from work that we've done with local authorities, and also an opportunity to really unpick their fee structure. I mentioned cash flow forecast. As we know, this enables the business to plan the activities for the year, to work out how much money they are going to have, to look at when they can spend that money and when they might need to tighten their belts, especially based on how local authority funding is received, sometimes monthly. Sometimes we know that it's delivered to providers in a slightly different way through estimates and balances. There are two simple cash flow spreadsheets within the resources, and as I've said, one will help them to reflect, to look at how things have changed, to look at how the government funding has supported them, but also another one to look forward, to think about what will change as they move forward, as things end beyond some of the extensions. The business map reinforces the importance of reserves. Reserves at a level sufficient to cover at least ideally 3 months running costs, average wages and routine operating costs, to cover when income is delayed or not enough to meet outgoings, but also to enable them to move from good to outstanding, towards the cost of replacements, repairs, renewals, etc., but to get through times like this as well. The final part is a reminder about COVID government funding. Within it, we've put the link so that providers can visit themselves, they can see what's available, but more importantly, we also highlight the importance of factoring the changes in their funding, in their financial and management as they move forward. All the work completed by providers in the previous two steps are designed to help identify and define the risks for their business. It's good practice to maintain a risk register. This will record the minor and hopefully not many, but major risks faced by business and the control measures which they might be able to put in place in respect of each of these risks. If providers identify risks, threats and concerns, challenges, whatever we choose to call it, they are in a better place to take steps to reduce or remove them. This activity can also identify opportunities, and there will be opportunities, whether it be developing something new, doing something slightly differently. At this stage, providers are asked to record their risks, to look back on all the finding out more, to think about what's changed, to think about the money, and to consider how this might impact on their business. So if we think about the risk, parents are paying less for additional services and hours. They then have to think about what might they do. You know, the risks, at this stage, think about what are the risks. So they have lower occupancy. They might need to have less staff. Their income is definitely smaller, which affects their ability to cover their expenditure. And finances are not breaking even. We'll return to the risk register in a few moments. Having identified the current business situation and possible risks, the business map now considers actions to reduce or remove them. The business map provides lots of food for thought and suggestions based on things that providers have done, work that local authorities have done. It provides links to further advice and things to consider. It doesn't include everything. There will be lots more. It's not an exhaustive list, but it also provides some worked examples of alternative models of delivery. So it explores stretching. So let's just very quickly look at two specific sections. The business map asks providers to reflect on their current model of delivery using all the information that they've collected earlier. So to identify that if the model works now or if it needs to change. It asks providers to consider what can be done, as well as how much flexibility can or cannot be offered. And that's really important. It suggests providers explore different models to understand the options. And we state some of the obvious. You know, increasing flexibility as parental work patterns are changing can be the difference to have lower or higher occupancy as we return out of lockdown and we return to a different place. Parents' needs have changed, so we need a flexible 15 and 30-hour offer. You know, we need to support full-time, part-time and flexible working patterns. And you know, for those of you who have flexible marketplaces, that that doesn't have to be all singing, dancing. It means that there needs to be choice. And if providers have bits of the day empty, or if they have empty afternoons, we know the scenario, offering something different offers their service, even their 15 hours for 2-year-olds and 15 hours for 3 and 4-year-olds, the universal entitled to a new part-time studying market. Thinking about how they maximise funding alongside play for places. So thinking about how they use those funded hours differently. If providers are finding that they are losing income and parents are requiring shorter days, how can they use their funding hours slightly differently? Many of you will have been in the room where we've talked about the 10, doing 3 10-hour days as a term time only option. An option that actually puts some income into those unused hours. And flexibility that doesn't compromise income. By that, I mean that if parents are asking for something different, that providers need to think what they offer. Drawing back to an 8 till 2 day is not necessarily a financially viable model, as it's very difficult to sell the bit before and the bit after. So flexibility that works for the provider and as best it can for parents as well. And making sure that providers are maximising capacity and income through stretching, if that's something for them across the year, enabling parents to pay for more across the year. Within the business map, there's some illustrations of stretching, and I know that there's lots of guidance out there that many of you have produced as well. So in the communicate section, we discuss marketing. There's a template in there using the 3 M's to develop a marketing plan. Keep it simple. That's the aim of this process. As you would imagine, we explore the support for families to reduce the cost of childcare. If we can support families to understand what they can access, they won't necessarily reduce everything that they pay for, and it might actually enable some parents to be able to buy more. And we think about how providers can use social media as an effective marketing tool to develop positive messages to reach new audiences. Both of marketing and social media is something that we plan to develop further as well in the putting into practice podcasts in due course. So having completed the comprehensive review and identified risks, we now ask providers to think about what actions might they be able to take. So in our example, our risk was parents paying for less services and additional hours. So we provide some examples to help. Going back to understand if parents aren't buying those additional hours, what do they want? If parents are using, if there are bits that are not being used, what could you do differently? So looking at alternative models of delivery, diversifying or offering new services, maybe looking at longer hours, different days, out of school, maybe 2-year-olds, if it's something that providers haven't done previously. And making sure that there's a marketing plan in place to reach, at the moment, this socially distanced world, but more importantly, a plan that reaches parents, whatever situation that we're in. Once the risk register is finished, the penultimate thing to do is to create an action plan. So what do providers need to do to take the steps in the risk register into actions to form a plan moving forward? And there's a simple action plan template included. So hopefully by this stage, there is an action plan ready to be implemented. Having an action plan, completing a cash flow forecast is really important. However, we want providers to ensure that they're measuring progress and reviewing things as they're changing, because things are changing so much at the moment, so that they can respond and take action immediately and know when things are wrong if things aren't going to plan. So the final actions beyond the action plan within the business map are around measuring progress and review. It's about keeping the cash flow up to date so people really know how the new arrangements, if things have changed or whatever is happening at the moment, is affecting the business. But also we give them a list of key performance indicators or things that they can use to help them understand if things are working. There's a table that includes some of the key measures within the business map, which will help providers to monitor regularly. And finally, set targets and build them into regular monitoring discussions with management, with committees, whoever it is. So what will you get? That is a whistle-stop tour through the document itself. And what will you get? As James has said, the evaluation, completing the evaluation will take you through to the drive, which you will be able to download the documents to be able to use. You'll also get the resources from the 19th with the notes, the PowerPoint, so that you can actually use that slide, part of, all of, to support your providers. So you'll receive the slide deck, notes, and you can use those however you wish. We'll also provide you with the accompanying tools. So again, you can use them on your portals. You can use the short videos when they're produced on websites as part of network meetings or within your workshops. So when we've developed the business map, it's been based on all the work that we've done with you and with providers over however many years. And as James touched on earlier, we've built it on the 4 principles. So hopefully it will be a tool that will enable you to provide up-to-date information to inform choices. And we've kept the language as simple as possible because we know that for some providers, business and business planning or business courses isn't a message that they respond to. So we've thought carefully about the language in the document, we've kept it simple, we've ordered the tasks, so hopefully it's manageable. It's a tool. It's a tool that you can add to those that you've already got if you have got tools, or it's a tool that you can use if you haven't got your own local tools. We've provided workshop examples, we've suggested good practice such as monitoring cash flows, etc., and the levels of reserve. And the business map provides a structure for a comprehensive review, or it can be used just in part for specific tasks like the cash flow or the review of demand. As James mentioned earlier, having knowledgeable and competent staff teams who can provide that responsive or that response by email or through telephone video conferencing is a part. And hopefully this tool will be something that will enable your teams to have that confidence, to be able to refer to be able to send on, and to be able to utilise within those discussions. But also when we think about the intervention, the last part of the jigsaw, as James mentioned, is that targeted intervention. And hopefully the business map, its content, the slide deck, the structure that we've put together can be used in part in workshops, peer networks or training, or can be used by officers on a one-to-one basis with providers who need that more individualized support. So it can provide that structure of that action planning and get into that action plan at the end. Not every officer working across early years schools and childcare we know is involved in the delivery of business support. In some areas there are specific business support functions, and in others there's not. But we know that all teams and team members can play a role in supporting providers and schools to make informed business decisions. Lewisham have kindly allowed me to use their early years COVID recovery plan as an illustration of what I mean. The highlighted sections really are all the bits that the teams touch and are engaged within business support. So let's first consider the early years team. The local authority provided ongoing professional development and training to develop business skills so the team can effectively support providers. Officers attend training sessions commissioned by the local authority, and they also developed additional bespoke training to cover those gaps. All the activities included in the plan were designed to build officer confidence in supporting providers to identify issues and empower officers to enable them to address those appropriately. Now, quality and inclusion. Other teams that work might be a schools team. All the teams that business support is not part of their day job, but actually they've got a really important part to play within a business support strategy. Firstly, being able to recognise the signs of sustainability during conversations with providers when they have them, and being able to feed this back. So the early education teams and family information service, whoever leads on the business support, can take action. Secondly, acting as that conduit for sharing information with providers and ensuring sustainability is a regular item on managers' networks. Thirdly, having an awareness of the tools that are out there, whether they be through the NDNA, PACey, the other support organisations, or a tool like this, and are able to know what they can do and offer links to them and promote them. Next, they have existing relationships, which can open doors sometimes to providers who might not have accessed support otherwise. And lastly, they're able to identify when sustainability or financial concerns might need support and things being put in place because they are impacting on quality and sufficiency. Last team just to look at quickly is the Families Information Service. Just like the Quality and Inclusion team, the Families Information team, being part of this strategy, are able to recognise the signs of sustainability during conversations with providers, and they're able to signpost and feed these through to the teams that can support, so action can be taken and support can be provided. So some final questions from me to think about as we head to an opportunity for questions and then a short break. How might you be able to use the business map tools and resources? How can these complement what you have if you already have things in place? And I know many of you have substantial and really useful things in place. And actually, who could be part of your plan so that we can achieve that maximum impact, so that providers are able to take the business decisions that they need to take moving forward? Thanks. And I'll hand back to James.
Thank you very much, Joe. And I encourage people to comment and make questions. As I said earlier, on the chat function seems to be the one that's working for you best this afternoon. There's one point that's been made by Carol in Surrey, and I know that you've got a good answer for this because it's one of the things that we've been discussing recently, and that's about timing of business support. Timing is everything really, and Carol makes the point that providers are tired, and I think we can absolutely empathise with anybody. Everybody's probably feeling it themselves, exhausted, have change fatigue, wanting things to be as firm and fixed and certain as possible. So, you know, if providers are focused on firefighting and getting through the day rather than taking a more forward facing look at their business and actually having the time to go through and use tools, how do we make sure we get the timing right when we're providing business support, I guess is the crux of that question. And what's the timing like now?
Okay, I think everything that we've spoken with local authorities about, and the fact that I had 2 one-to-one sessions yesterday of both providers were unable to make it, is that, you know, as you rightly say, providers are firefighting at the moment. You know, there is a concern about themselves, but also a major concern about their businesses. I'd like to think that the way that we've written this and the way that it's been put together can be a staged approach. And even with the smallest headspace, because I absolutely recognise that heads are full with the now, but the now will soon become the then. And actually, we really need to be looking at the next to make sure that things change. And it is about headspace. So it's a very strange answer to that, I know, because I don't have a real answer. So I'm going to hand back to you at that point, James.
I was convinced you'd have a clear answer from that following our discussion earlier in the week, because the, the the issue
My,
is it
my
is.
concern
Sorry, yeah.
my concern is that actually, tools like this, they need to be picked up and worked with and worked through. And putting them off until tomorrow means that it will go by the by, and before we know it, we will end up in the next. And the decisions that we need to be thinking about for the next, which should be being taken now, won't have been taken. And we might end up with some providers in a position of it's gone too far.
Yeah, yeah. A good question, great question from Angela Deutsch Nelson, and this is around confidentiality and privacy. I think we've moved away from. I think we've deliberately called business map the business map because we didn't want to be calling it a business plan tool. And actually, the business map is about a direction, and it is about a process of thinking that people can dip in and out of. But Angela shares the observation that we would agree with, is that providers tend to want to keep their costs close to their chests and not want to share all of the information about their businesses, whilst accessing business support, even when they may be identifying that they've got some serious or some significant challenges to address. So how can we best encourage providers to be as open and honest as possible in one-to-one? And you've been doing quite a few one-to-ones recently. What do you think about that as an issue?
Absolutely. You find in larger group online sessions that providers, that is obviously they're not wanting to share even occupancy data in some respects because they don't want their competitors to know whether it's good, bad or indifferent. The tool or the map has been put together, the business map has been put together in a way that it can be used absolutely as an individual. It's about a reflection. It's about them being able to do that work. I am quite hard-nosed, as you know, and actually we can't fix it if we don't know if it's broken. So that thorough investigation, that thorough drill down of finances, of cash flow, and where they are now is really important. I have been on so many calls one-to-one with providers, and even in group sessions, where you have gone away and you've looked at their fee structures, and you can't understand which is their break even or how they put those things together. So asking challenging questions, asking them to complete. And I suppose with my hard business head on, I would say that no one is ever going to give anyone any money without understanding the financial position that somebody is in. So providers who don't want to submit cash flows as part of funding applications or as part of additional resource, then for me, it's an unreasonable request. And your local authority is not sharing that information. The information is going to be used to make a judgment against a set of criteria as to whether or not. Now, businesses that want help will share their information with you. There is a hunger for help. There is definitely an appetite from providers to gain assistance. And actually, I walk away from every conversation, not taking any of their information, anything confidential away. I've just given a critical friend an analysis to enable them to be able to do the things and make the decisions that they need to make.
And I suppose there's an obvious benefit of you being an independent external person doing that in terms of having a one-to-one conversation around business support with a provider. But of course, a lot of people on this webinar will be wanting and needing to do that as part of their job. And so I think perhaps that the difficulty there is that duality of role. So we need to be very boundaried in that, well, I may be representing the council, who may be your biggest customer and funder, but actually this session and this business support is about confidential analysis of your current business situation. So there may need to be fixed and firm boundaries between the local authority as funder and the local authority as business supporter.
Absolutely.
So codes of conduct there. I think Kent have suggested they use a professional code of conduct, which is about how that information will be collected, used, and or not. So that might offer people some much needed reassurance.
Interestingly, the one-to-one, some of the one-to-one support that's happened since March with a number of local authorities has also been part of growing officer confidence as well. So on some of the work that's happened, there has been an officer on each of those calls for a twofold: to support provide local authority to build confidence, but also so that they can do follow-up support as well. And they're able to work with those providers as afterwards. And actually, we didn't struggle to fill those. We've had no problem at all in providers coming forward, knowing that the local authority would be on the call as well.
I mean, we've talked about timing, haven't we? And you've talked about demand for support there. I mean, Knowsley, we've worked with Knowsley, and they share the example that actually they put on business support training, but actually take up was much lower than they expected. So why might take up be low for business support as is offered? Is it about timing? Is it about language? It's about being explicit about what that offer is. So why might people be, what are the tricks of the trade really? Why might take up be low, and what advice do we have in avoiding low take up?
Part of me doesn't want to give a very big answer, because as we get to the end of the session, there is some further discussion around that. I think that for a lot of providers, how it is sold, the benefits of what they're going to get out of it, and it being differentiated, because people need different things. People need to be able to engage with tools, they need to be able to get the information, and they're more than happy, as you said at the beginning, to be able to go off and do their own thing. But then there are people who will engage with, will engage on workshops, will come face to face when we could do that, or will engage, and there will still be further action. So we need to then support those and handhold those through to the action plan and the next stage.
Yeah. What might a typical one-to-one support session look and feel like? How do you structure a one-to-one session with a provider?
Okay. Yeah, no problem at all. In my confirmation email that I send them at the moment when we're booking virtual meetings, I'm really frank, say that my role is to offer, be a critical friend, to help them unpick where they are now, to use the experience that I've got from working with other providers to be able to look at maybe things that could be done better, but also to support them in unpicking and coming up with other solutions. When we start a meeting, I'm again very frank that actually we've got to be honest. We can't fix things unless we know exactly what's broken. So I tend to start off with, tell me about you, tell me about the setting, and what are the challenges that you've got at the moment. I will have, before the meeting, I've gone away and done some research on the organisation. So when we come to the part that they talk about occupancy, I might then put into that the fact that when I actually Google them and follow through to the Family Information Service, the links are broken, and that's the only link that they've got, so parents can't find them. So there's a little bit of preparation work before that. It is very much around challenge and asking why and how, the same way as we work with local authorities. Why do they deliver that model? Why is that afternoon not full? And then get them to start to think about some of the other things, like, have you thought about offering 2.5 days? And then really getting to the point where hopefully they've got new ideas, actions, and frequently things that, because they are doing it day in, day out, they no longer see. And sometimes because providers are so close, they're questions that they've not asked themselves because they're busy doing. So it is very much a critical friend. We have worked and we can work through some of the finances and looking at that side of things. But very much a majority of the support is about them, how do they increase their occupancy? So there are tools, we can use the tools with them. I very much will support providers, but try and encourage providers to take the actions away and do them. And then we've got follow-up meetings of which we've come back and we've asked to see what they've done or what difference it's made. And did they try that?
I've been struck by you coming back and talking about how effective follow-up sessions are, having had intensive 1.5 hour sessions with providers and then following them up to see how things have been progressed. I guess that's going to be a mix of providers not doing very much, or some doing a little bit, or some doing a lot, and sometimes those follow-up sessions being about clarification or confidence. Because I think actually a lot of providers just really want to do the right thing, and they want to do things that are proper and right and within all of the rules, of which there are many in early years funding and in business. So sometimes not feeling confident about what is possible and creative and what is new around that can stymie in innovation, can't it?
Absolutely. And I'll give you a really, really simple example. On a call, a provider was struggling with income, and they weren't charging any additional services. It was a community run organisation, and they weren't charging any services at all for snack. And one of the conversations that we had was just to unpick the why. I always do the what you can do, what you're able to do, and then why aren't you doing it? And it's because the trustees had made this decision. So they took it away. We discussed that they can. She took it away, and then I had an email 2 weeks later to say that they decided to offer it, or to suggest it was a voluntary contribution, not with a monetary value put on it. And actually, for that small preschool, it generated that term £100. By people being able to make a voluntary contribution as they felt was appropriate to them at that time from nothing. And it's only £100, but that was a big difference for that organisation at that moment in time.
Okay, it's a question around mixed groups or sector-specific groups, and by that I mean sub-sector specific groups. I guess for larger information-giving groups, there's lots of things that are common to all providers, and actually next week when we do our provider webinar, it's open to all different types of providers. So blanket information should be able to be accessed by mixed sector groups. I guess when you filter down and do the workshops and the training and the smaller groups, that's when it starts to become more important for sector specific.
Absolutely. When you're delivering high level messages, as you rightly say, a large group is fine. But what you tend to, and especially whether you're physically in a room with providers or whether you are in a virtual room with providers, if you get it wrong, and you have, for example, you can be drawn into a conversation around hours and delivery and models of delivery with a mixed group with full day care, childminders, preschools, and schools. And if you're not careful, you lose the schools, because you start having conversations that aren't relevant to them. So depending on what the content is best to split. And that's why in a lot of our work, we have done sector specific, because I can take the same messages, but I differentiate them and I make them appropriate to the audience, the school, the childminders. You might not put some of the models in, and you just think about the different things that you do, and it all becomes relevant, and they leave with a 90% relevant content, rather than it being pulled in one direction by a proportion of another part of the sector.
Okay. So let's just say a few things about next week's provider webinar. This webinar today is part of a two-part commission from DFE. And next week we will be providing 2 webinars for providers, mixed groups, one in the daytime and one in the evening. And thank you to everybody who's been promoting those sessions. The daytime one is full at 1,000 places, and the evening one is almost filling up at about 800 providers signed up for that. And it's exclusively for providers. We'll follow the business map process in a little bit more practical detail, and we'll have real providers talking about how they have planned and adapted and changed their businesses in that session. We're hoping to be offering more places to providers by the end of this week, because demand has been so big. And yes, every local authority will be provided with the resources that we're sharing with providers at that point. We won't be able to tell you which providers are booked on, because there's just so many of them, and it's impossible to match providers to specific local authority areas. I know lots of you are asking for that, but we will, like this one, be sharing a recording of the webinar, so that those people not able to attend or would prefer to pick and choose which bits they want to watch, that will be available too. So we will be sharing as much as we can in terms of the webinar content and the tools, so that you can pick and mix the bits that you feel may fit into your strategy. And I love the Lewisham example. The Lewisham example is a brilliant illustration around how a whole team can join up and provide business support. And I know there'll be lots of shades and connections of that in the local authority examples that we'll be sharing later in today's session. So that's definitely something to look for, as we will be referencing things like social media and marketing. So please do keep asking questions. We do have another Q&A session by the end of today's webinar. It is now 1:40. We're going to take a break for 10 minutes until 1:50. So until then, we will see you back in 10 minutes. Thank you very much, Joe. Hello again. I hope you enjoyed your break. It's now time for us to carry on with this afternoon's webinar. We are due to finish today at 3 o'clock, so it's just over an hour to go. And there's a shift of gear for the next session. We're going to have two sessions, both containing local authority examples and experiences. So the first one will be around using the tools as a framework to support business decisions, and then we'll have a look at some examples of targeting support to maximise its impact. So first up is a session to be chaired by Joe, which includes Derby City and Portsmouth Council. So over to you, Joe.
Super. Thanks very much, James. This triangle in reality has been my job and what has consumed mornings, evenings and afternoons since the beginning of June in reality. You know, a variety of different things, from producing information, the one-to-one support, workshops and training. I know many of you will already have a framework, and I know that there are many local authorities which business support is already embedded in the day-to-day work. It's happened, it's happening, and it will continue to happen. But hopefully this will be something else that you can add. The tool is something that you can add back into whatever it is that you think that you will be able to do moving forward. The childcare market is diverse. It's its beauty, but it's also a challenge. If we look at a subsector such as preschool, you know, there are very many different sorts of preschool, how they run, their sizes, etc. And in the same way that there is such diversity between the subsectors and the sector, business knowledge and skills varies, as you know, across sectors as well. Some will have packages that do it for them. Some will have people that do it for them. Some will have it absolutely sorted, and they pick up the next thing and they run with it. But others don't. And, you know, over the last 6 months in my day-to-day work with providers, you know, I am surprised frequently as to some of the knowledge, and in some cases, you know, some of the things and the decisions that are made, not based on business decisions, but fees going up based on what other people are doing, fee structures built on the fact that it's a 10% increase. So, you know, online, there's a clear need for differentiated offer when it comes to supporting providers, from light touch information to peer networks, or formal courses, one-to-one, and even that might need to be differentiated depending on what providers actually need. Online information toolkits such as this, all the plethora of stuff that we have used through Childcare Works, that we used through Achieving 2-Year-Olds, has been created to support business support, are out there, and are resources that some providers will run with, they will use, they are using and continue to use. But some need direct in-person support to achieve a lasting change. I've asked two colleagues to come on and share examples of some of the work that we've collaborated on over 10 years or the last 6 months, as the case may be, as illustration on just some different approaches and actually some of the outcomes that can be achieved. So I started work, my relationship with Portsmouth is a new one that we started over the summer. And I've asked Layla to come forward now and just tell you a little bit about the journey and the things that we did in Portsmouth. Welcome, Layla.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. My name is Layla Richards, and I'm an Early Years Quality and Sufficiency Officer for Portsmouth City Council's Early Years and Childcare Service. I'm the linked officer for the Ofsted registered childminders, preschools, nurseries and after-school clubs in the north of the city, and I provide support and challenge across a variety of quality and sufficiency themes, such as working with new providers on their journey to opening, improving policy and practice, Ofsted and EYFS, safeguarding, leadership, staff recruitment, management, development and retention, business and financial planning, and working with management committees. And I'm also a part of the pool of trainers who deliver the Portsmouth Early Years Training and Development Programme and our annual Early Years Conference. I have worked with the team in Portsmouth for 11 years, and during that time, the service's role and responsibilities have moved through different phases. We have responded to changes in legislation, inspection frameworks and curriculums, but the continuing COVID-19 pandemic has presented the biggest challenge to our early years community we have ever witnessed. During the first lockdown in spring 2020, I maintained regular contact with my linked settings by phone, email, text message, and eventually we moved to virtual meetings online. In the first instance, we were checking to see if they were staying open or closing. And if they were open, then how many children were attending? Were these children of critical workers or were they vulnerable children? And if they were closed, how were the families managing for childcare? And how were they staying in touch with their families? And were they offering support with home learning? We also supported a number of families to move to other settings if needed during that first lockdown. After the initial flurry of contacts to establish what settings were doing regarding staying open or closing, then began the work to understand what financial support streams were available to the childcare businesses and getting the information out to them. We sent out information sheets to help them navigate through and responded to queries as they were coming in. Reopening in June 20 was a challenge for most providers I worked with. They felt unsafe, anxious, and unprepared to welcome families back. I had lots of queries about the safety guidance and how to implement it, and lots of reassuring conversations with childminders and leaders. Most settings reopened in June, but the number of families returning was still very low. Settings reported that they wouldn't be able to continue operating if paying families didn't start returning soon, and their projections for autumn 2020 were very worrying. As a team, our focus was moving away from providing advice around improving quality of practice, and far more time was spent talking to providers about sustainability, business planning, and financial support streams. It was at this point that we engaged the services of Hempsels and were introduced to our linked business consultant, Jo Pringle. Jo facilitated a market management essentials session for our team. This included looking at our childcare sufficiency assessment, unpicking what our data was telling us at the beginning of 2020, and identifying issues and gaps in the childcare market. Jo helpfully shared tools for managing market change, different models for delivering funded places, including stretched, flexible, and collaborative approaches, and a variety of helpful tools to support business planning. This session was incredibly helpful, and I felt more confident and equipped to support my linked providers with their business challenges. Jo facilitated Finding Your Way Through workshops for providers. I attended one of these, so I was able to hear the same messages and listen to the providers' concerns. We shared the PowerPoint and links to the business support tools after the session. Following the workshops, we offered providers the opportunity to access a one-to-one session with Jo and their linked early years officer to talk about their unique business challenges in greater detail and agree actions for them to take forward. I targeted providers who I knew were worried and struggling to build their numbers back up. I attended sessions with the school, a privately run setting, and a couple of committee run settings. We discussed all manner of issues: numbers now, occupancy potential, staffing, models, fees versus funding, other income opportunities, reserves, forecasting, business support funding streams, marketing ideas, moving more online, being visible online, doing video show rounds, sharing their safety guidance in a positive light and ways to reassure parents. I agreed to follow up with settings to see how they were getting on with their actions and monitor if numbers were improving. Much of our work is still focused on supporting settings to balance COVID-19 safety guidance and run a sustainable business. I'm in regular contact with them to check how they are feeling, what they are offering, and how things are going. Thankfully, most are reporting that they are recovering well and felt better prepared going into this current national lockdown. Some are stating that they are remaining busy and parents are confident to bring their children into the setting. I have had a handful of group-based providers who need closer monitoring as their numbers are still low, and they are using the cash flow forecast more confidently to anticipate what their position is. I would say that this group of providers have moved towards being more proactive to protect and grow their businesses, whereas before COVID-19, they were reacting to the low numbers with surprise and without a plan or an idea of how to address this. One new manager of a very traditional committee-run preschool engaged fully with our workshops and one-to-one sessions and has made some positive changes to her marketing, fee structure, and access some of the government funding streams. She reports that she was in a better position in autumn 2020 than they were in autumn 2019. She has grown in confidence and entered this current lockdown more focused, positive, and calm than the one in March 2020. Although this past year has presented different challenges to me in my early years officer role, I have learned a lot around business support, and I feel more confident to work with providers around improving their businesses, and I have a catalogue of tools to help me and the people I work with. Thank you.
Thank you, Layla. I suppose just one thing to add to that is that when we started, it was very one-sided in one-to-one. And by the time that we finished, it was definitely a partnership approach. And actually, I became more of an observer. So thank you very much for that. Now, I'm going to invite Heather up now in a moment. I've worked with Derby City for 10 years, and I've got to be honest that, you know, we've worked through 12.5 hours right the way through 30 hours and into COVID-19. And we were seeing some of the same faces on sessions, and some of the content was the same. So we decided to take a step back and look at how we could do things differently. And I've asked Heather just to share a different approach, which is about taking attendance and moving attendance at events to actually something that generates actions and uses the tools moving forward. So welcome, Heather.
Hi, as Jo said, my name's Heather Ryder-Carrington. I work for Derby City. My role is a childcare and families information team manager. I did start my role 20 years ago as a business support officer, so that's how I came in. Just to give you context for Derby, we're a quite small team. We're a unitary council. We're just 7 miles across, and you know, we're made up of a team of just 5.3. So, and that covers all aspects of FIS, funding, take-up, processing of payments. So a lot of our issue has always been because the old business support officer role was gone, is how we deliver business support, particularly at crisis times when COVID hit back in March. In context, we've got about 51 private day nurseries, 51 schools, 137 childminders, and about 63 out of school. So COVID came, obviously everything went crazy, and we knew, going back to James's point, it was really important to get that clear information out. But, you know, we needed to do that quickly, smartly, and with some impact. So what we did, like Layla, we worked with Hempsels to do some information sessions. I don't know whether it was a sign of the times, because we have always had problems with business support and not attending, and it's really frustrating because you spend that money and time and they don't come. But because perhaps of the fear factor at the time, out of our 72 preschools and private days, we had 40, so that was 53%. So that worked really, really well. So the information sessions was very much using the context of giving concise information and really the starting of the tool, which is the business mapping. And, you know, feedback was really, really well. One of the immediate things that that did for us is that it highlighted the massive issue with regard to social media. And straight away we were able to put something in. So we did the information sessions. We were really pleased with the take up, but then it was really about the so what. As a local authority, we were still doing all the things to support them, getting PPE, making sure they did the grants. And I think in the past, the learning always has been is that you do the sessions and then nothing comes out of it, because unless as the business support officer, you do it for them, or you hassle them, or all the issues regarding only getting part information. So what we agreed that we would do is we would really make them do some work. I think that'd be fair to say, Joe, is that we then did some action learning sets. So on the back of that, sorry, just going back to the information sessions, one, just picking on that, we did do it in sector. And I think by doing it in sector, we were able to do more precise information. When I talk later on, it's actually gone into, it's sort of extended from there. So what we did that in July, we did the social media. Obviously, we got through whatever summer was. We were lucky in Derby by the 1st of June, other than about 10 schools and very few providers, we were up and open. So obviously our settings were very responsive. By autumn, we'd got all of our settings open, so it looked like things were doing well, but there were real massive concerns about sustainability. So what we did do is we did an action learning set, and we did it in 2 parts. We were quite mean to the providers because we said, right, we're going to do one-to-one sessions. Again, a lot of the people who attended the first came back, because I think on the back of that, they started to want to have more support in certain areas. But we said, what you need to do is come on this session, look at the tools that are relevant to you, look at whether it was the tools that Joe provided or the tools that were out there. And what you really then need to do is you need to come back in a month's time, and you need to come back with a plan. Because I think all of my team were such that, you know, they don't follow things up, and we've been really nice, and we wanted some accountability, we wanted some direction, we wanted some action, because it was important for sustainability. So what we did 2 sessions, one in the October, and we then did one a month later on. And on the back of that, they submitted action plans to Joe. And we then did joint feedback sessions. Noting some of the concerns regarding sharing best practices, I do think that broke down quite a lot of the barriers, because they were very open, because I think they thought that they were all in this together. So, and by having the first information session, some of the common issues and concerns had come out. So by the time we did the action sets with follow-ups, I think the peer-to-peer support had already started within the group, which for a local authority like me, where you've not got capacity, is great, because it's what you want to do. So we did the first part, like action learning set. We went through all the things. We went through the business tool again, with all the things very similar to what it looks like now. 2 weeks later on, we did the follow-ups, but they had to submit action plans. And huge learnings, because we made them do something, which we don't always do, because we kind of leave them to do it. But we had preschools who did all of their staffing. They stopped doing wraparound because they knew now that it wasn't cost effective. I mean, some real key measures across all of them. I think our that group are very alive to parents' preferences and knowing that they've got to change models, that they can't do the same with the same. Even if, you know, they're not there yet, that action learning set reinforced why they've got to make some changes, and some have since there. What we have got out of that is that we haven't in Derby had really an active provider group, a voice of the sector. And on the back of that, a lot of those people that attended those information sessions and follow-up now actively want to be part of that group that we're going to call it the COVID Action Group. So for us, there was an offset. As an officer who's trying to balance everything, and probably put one person with the skilled business support, the learning for us is that by doing it, well, virtually helped, but in sets where we could have lots of people in one go with the tool, it meant that we got better impact quicker. Some of the things that James have said, I am lucky. I do have an FIS team. I have a coordinator who I think's business skills have grown through the DFE return because she's doing that constant talk and chat. But for us in Derby, now we have got a tool. We have got a process where we could do business support virtually quickly to get to more people. But I think the other big learning is that now we've got more of an accountability action plan, which we've probably not done before. So that's kind of the context of how it happened for Derby, how we used it to match to the capacity that we've got and the impact that we're seeing for a small local authority with business support that's always been very reactive, and our response has been really, really good.
Super. Thank you, Heather. And it wasn't interesting. You know, we have to be honest. The group wasn't massive. It wasn't all the providers in Derby City, but it made a difference. And when we're thinking about capacity issues and what support strategy might be, pulling people together like that to give the tasks, to facilitate feedback. But the important thing within that was that we got the action plans. And some of them were better quality than others. Some of them were amazing. There were some who were jumping through the hoops, but in the main, and what that has given Heather is a follow-up, a structure to follow up with one-to-one. So thank you very much to both of you. And I'm going to hand over now to Barbara, who's going to think about targeting support for maximum impact.
Thank you, Jo. You were talking earlier about timing when we deliver the business support for providers. And timing, of course, can be key. And sometimes it starts with a good understanding of need or risk, depending on which way you're coming at it from. We've also talked about provider business support being generic for all or targeted to specific groups or areas, and that kind of funnel approach. But what underpins that is our understanding of the market, using data to inform some of those decisions. And there's a wealth of data that can be drawn upon to target resources. A provider audit can be very, very useful, and it can link to the business map and the information that is collated through that, particularly around analysing demand and getting feedback from parents, which can be difficult to do, and particularly in the current climate. We need to understand what theoretical and operating capacity is, what the flex is within our market, and map capacity to sub-local authority areas so we can identify any gaps or any oversupply which might indicate potential for closures. And some of the questions that we need to be thinking about is to have a view on the percentage of income which comes from paid for or funded places within the local market, within providers within that local market. Understanding what's happening to demand, whether demand for paid for places is decreasing, which was the feedback that we were getting from the autumn term, or whether it's changing for different age ranges, for example, for younger children, for the under twos. Thinking about whether settings have changed their delivery models, and if so, how have they done it? That will give us an indication of what's going on in the market and what some of those needs and risks are. Thinking about how the setting is run. Is it a standalone or part of a chain? Is it in rented premises, or is it owner occupied? Because this may impact on what funding those settings have been able to access. Thinking about the child population. Has the birth rate decreased, as it has in many different areas? And if so, does that mean we will need less capacity in those areas in the future? Has the number of children eligible for the 2-year-old entitlement and 30 hours changed? Is it likely to change over the next 12 months or so? And think about some of these demand and population data can support us to identify what types of provision or geographical areas might be more at risk. Or you can drill down to individual settings, RAG rating against some key criteria, such as levels of demand or types of offer, income derived from fee paid or funded childcare, or are they in an area with a variety of provision available, etc.? Or are they governed by a single large daycare setting? And data regarding the local employment market and things like new housing and regeneration may help you identify where additional childcare may be required in the future. And this can be used to identify where settings that have current challenges may need to be supported to ensure they're available when there is new demand. Similarly, if a new retail development or a new business is setting up, you may need to ensure there's childcare to support the workforce, even if demand is low in that area currently. There are a number of ways that we can use data to target our supports, and we're going to hear now from 2 colleagues on how they've used data to focus their support. Firstly, from Tracy Shaw at Bexley. And Bexley, as many of you do, complete an annual audit, and in addition have undertaken 2 surveys of providers using online or telephone discussions rather than self-complete surveys. And that, combined with a mix of information they already held, supported them to develop a risk matrix, identifying settings in greatest difficulty. So Tracy, over to you.
Thank you, Barbara. Hello everyone, and thank you for inviting me to come along today. As Barbara said, I work in the London Borough of Bexley. I'm an early years support officer, and I'm part of a team of 3 lead officers and 7 other officers, all at the same level. We all dip in and out of support, but myself and another colleague qualified as early years business advisors about 5 years ago, and this lockdown COVID situation has certainly brought all of our learning up to the front and enabled us to be able to use our knowledge. So once settings had all settled down, if they ever did, during the first lockdown in March, so we knew who was open, who was closed, they were contacted by their allocated officers, and through telephone conversation mainly. Some had to be done via email, but the majority were done by phone, to answer a business sustainability questionnaire, a discussion. We wanted to find out what the concerns were around what might be affecting their sustainability during the lockdown and post the lockdown. And obviously we were into our 3rd lockdown, so this is all, carries on. What financial support had they managed to access to ensuring that they'd applied for all the grants and funding streams that they were allowed, that they could? What were their concerns around staffing? Were staff shielding, that kind of thing? Were there vulnerable staff? What children were returning to them, and what were their normal numbers at that time in a term? In a school year. And then we asked them what support was required from us as an early years team during the lockdown and after the lockdown. So all that information was then fed back into information we already had. So we already RAG rated our settings with different criteria, and we fed that information back in so that we rated them again on a COVID rating, if you like, in 6 different levels. and we differentiated the responses between those that were our more needy settings, so those that were in our red, amber and amber settings, were contacted by myself and my colleague who had done the qualification, and then anyone that was any of the settings that were lower in that, we upskilled the rest of our team to help them to be able to respond to any support that was needed. Myself and my colleague created an evening webinar based around some recent learning that we'd done on the back of our early years business advisor training. And we invited our most vulnerable settings to attend. Now that wasn't easy either. There was people that we wanted to come, didn't come, but hey, we had 3. I know it doesn't sound many, but we had 3, so it was a start. During the training, we identified that actually our settings were not very business savvy. Some of them didn't have business plans. I know there was only 3, but thinking broader than that, we knew that they didn't have business plans, they didn't have cash flows, they didn't actually know the actual running costs of daily, weekly, how much money they had to have coming in. Websites, they didn't have websites. Some of them did, some of them didn't. What they had on social media was not brilliant, and so we sent out templates to our settings and useful websites and links to support them to do this better. And then within the team, within the training, those other settings that were able to support each other, they exchanged phone numbers with each other and have gone on to support each other to set up a website, that sort of thing. So some of the templates that we sent out were the ones that you did already mentioned in your business map, so the SWOT analysis and the pestle analysis, and we went through that at the time of training, which was really useful to the providers that were there. So we have been able to make a small difference to some settings, not necessarily the ones that attended our trainings, but just ones that we knew were struggling. We had a small pot of money, small grant money, that we were able to use on the back of what our officers came back with from talking with their settings. So at the moment, 2021, we're currently in the process of, like lots of you probably, reviewing the financial returns for 1920, and we'll further rate them again against any other information we have, and then we can look in depth into setting viability pre-COVID. I noticed that somebody commented that some settings that were likely to have closed pre-COVID managed to carry on because of the funding they received. So it'd be a good idea to see what their position was this time last year, and are they any worse off than they were this time last year anyway. So I wanted to just share one of the settings that came to our training, and so it's a preschool that's a pack away in a community hall. It's run by the building is owned by Bexley. Next door they've got a large day nursery, which was a day neighbourhood nursery, part of the children's centre at the time, and Sure Start. And over the years, they've been next door to each other for 15 years, I suppose. And over the years, because of the where they are in the neighbourhood, where the neighbourhood nurseries were all put, there was lots of young children, and probably the preschoolers never really had to think about their occupancy like they have this year. So they went away from the training, and they've reported to me to say that they've negotiated the rent reduction with the council. What they did do was put staff on part-time hours, but what we've advised them, they could furlough some staff part-time and bring them backwards and forwards and do a flexible furlough, so they're doing that as well. They've gone across to the nursery manager next door, and they've suggested that, you know, if there's if they've got too many children coming into them and they haven't got the vacancy, that they could direct them over to the preschool, so working together. They've also got a bit of a marketing plan going on, and we're going to give them a small amount of grant money to use some advertising materials. So, you know, they're looking at banners, getting someone to make their Facebook pages and their website look better so that they're more accessible. Just things like on Google search, they weren't necessarily a pin on the map, so when people were looking, they weren't coming up. And they're going to leaflet drop to local houses. There's a lot of new housing that's gone up in the area, and so hopefully they'll be able to get more inquiries that way around their vacancies. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting, a really good example of how data can be used to target support and the impact of that support. So thank you for sharing that on behalf of Bexley. And now we're going to hear from Sarah Spencer from Gloucestershire, who'll be sharing their work around using data again to rag rate settings to understand the market position and sustainability issues to inform their planning. So thank you, Sarah.
Okay, lovely, thank you. And thank you for inviting me this afternoon. So I can really echo everything that Tracy said so far. It's been very similar to what we've done in Gloucestershire. We were very fortunate in 2018 that we, through a reshape of the early years service, were able to have a specific business support and market management team. So I lead that team. I have support of a childcare officer. Both of us qualified in business support and had or have still got childcare businesses, so can be professionally empathetic with the sector. I also oversee the funding team within the business support team, so we deal with all the funding payments. So we have had the business support team running for a while, and we have offered the sector free business support through a business referral form. So we wanted very much to ask the providers to identify what it was that they particularly wanted. So what did they want to achieve through that support? What were the outcomes they were aiming for? And it's enabled us to look at the impact of what we're doing. So that was something that we started. But with COVID, what we did obviously identify was there was a lot of concern within the sector. We carried on funding our providers to reflect their claims during the lockdown period initially. Additional payments, where a setting had closed, what we did was additional payments were made to the providers that had taken on the displaced children. So that we sorted. The concerns we found around that time were from those settings that had a number of fee-paying children, and they weren't coming, so that presented quite a concern with regards to sort of finance and sustainability moving forward. Settings used the job retention scheme, and business support was available to all providers throughout this, so supporting them with that business support to access the furlough scheme and other sort of options for them. In June, we circulated a survey to all of our providers, and that was to help us to understand the impact of the pandemic, their immediate challenges and anticipated challenges over the coming months, and the support needed to maintain the sufficiency, good quality provision across the county. The survey was sent to 732 providers, and we had 260 responses across all of the localities. Gloucestershire's made up of 6 different localities, and we have an early years locality lead for each of those localities, and their work is predominantly around supporting settings with children with SEND and also looking at quality, so Ofsted quality, but we're all part of the same early years service, so we work very closely together. So what we did, the survey covered a number of areas which allowed us to risk assess future sustainability and the barriers that settings envisage moving forward. We worked in partnership with our Playgroup and Toddler Association, our local one, and we also consulted with the commissioning team within the local authority to look at the childcare provision that it was run from commissioned children and family centres. So we had 260 responses, as I said. What we did with the information that we collected, we were able to really analyse the data that came in, because we'd asked questions about, you know, what was their position last year and what was their predicted financial position this year, and deficits. Some of the things that came back to us were the committee run provision, who are charities who lost the ability to, you know, access the maximum fundraising that, you know, they would normally be doing. So we've got 282 committee run provision in Gloucestershire, 336 childminders and 78 governor run provision, so school-based provision. On top of that, we've got 173 out of school clubs and 97 holiday clubs, some of which operate both services. But what we did, we looked at the deficit situation and RAG rated in terms of financial concern, and then from that took the analysis further and broke it down. We work in schools place planning areas in Gloucestershire, so what we did was looked at those school place planning areas, looked at the childcare places and need in the area, and RAG rated based on that provision in the area to see, you know, if they were rated a red RAG rating in terms of deficit, so financial impact, and also red RAG rating in that if this provision closes, we're going to have a problem with sufficiency in the area. So a lot of time was spent looking at that. And the purpose of doing that was to actually feed that to senior managers to actually identify the impact that COVID was having on the sector and to try to access some additional funding support to help the sector where there was clearly an identified need. I don't think any of us anticipated that COVID would be going on as long as it has done. So things have moved, people have changed, the sector's changed somewhat. Some of the sector are very proactive and are changing their business model to deliver a different service. But we've subsequently followed a further survey to see where they are now. And we're at a situation at the moment where moving forward, we are hoping to be able to offer some financial and business support to those that are identified through set criteria that they are in need, and we need to support them the best way we possibly can. So at the moment, we have an expression of interest form out to the sector, and once those come in, we have recruited a consultant who will be familiar with some of you at Hempsall's, I'm sure, who is supporting us through this, and then we'll be looking at how we move that forward. And it won't just be expression of interest criteria, here's some money. It's definitely going to be an engagement and a support through how we can look at business models and moving forward to make this a sustainable business as we all get back to hopefully the new normal. So that's where we're at, really, in Gloucestershire.
Thank you, Sarah. Again, really interesting to find out how you are using data to inform some of those planning decisions that you're having to make, and to make those choices about who can access support and who doesn't access support, depending on a whole range of different issues. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So we've talked about timing, and the point that some of you made, that that timing can be quite difficult. And we've also talked about engagement and levels of engagement, because the current climate has made it more difficult for providers to maintain a sustainable business, and many more are seeking support from their local authorities at a time when local authorities do not have the business support resource. And we know that providers will contact their local authority when they've reached crisis point. And the whole point of this is that we need to encourage them to work through some of these issues before they reach crisis point. So thinking about some of the reasons that providers might be reluctant to engage, and you've already mentioned some of these in the chat and in the discussions, but for some it's a cultural mindset. We have providers who prioritise practice, quality, regulatory issues over business skills, and this can act as a real barrier. It's not so long ago I was sitting with providers who almost refused to accept that they were a business, and I think that is moving on, but we're not there yet with everybody. And we know that provider relationships with parents can get in the way of business, where we have good supportive relationships with our parents, and quite rightly those should be in place. This can sometimes get in the way of activities related to charging, securing fees and payments. Somebody mentioned marketing earlier, marketing in its broadest sense. And nowadays, providers wear many different hats, and some may lack the experience, the expertise, or the confidence to market their business, which is such an integral part of running that business. And of course, strategic planning, forecasting, and financial management. When 30 hours was first introduced, it reinforced our understanding that many providers lacked business skills, including cost of delivery, forecasting, budgeting, and financial management. And that's still the case to this day. And some of those issues may be in the hard to deal with or another time box. And some may not realise the skills are missing or essential in the current environment. So what can we do to support engagement? Joe made the point earlier about settings needing to understand we cannot help or offer advice or support unless we have an understanding of where they are. But we need to think about marketing and awareness raising as crucial in securing provider engagement with the business support that is available. It's a sell rather than tell approach, explaining how it will make a difference. Providers need to understand why business support should be embraced and valued, not just in terms of financial security, but also in helping the setting be in a position to continue to support the families and children. And different providers may tune in to different messages. Talked earlier about different levels and layers of support, and thinking about how support can be tailored to the needs of different provider types. We talked about a funnel approach and perhaps offering support at different levels, some basic, some intermediate, some advanced. We know some providers benefit from a really good level of financial management support internally, whilst others, it's the practitioner or manager that is a jack of all trades and just takes this on as an additional task. So it makes sense to think about different levels of business support. Some benefiting from that very basic level of information, that broad sweep of information to all, some from bespoke small group or even one-to-one support. Resource is a key element here, of course, and a graduated approach can take more time and be costly. Thinking about incentives to providers to attend training, perhaps including some kind of accreditation. And you've mentioned earlier that one of the big issues that we have when we offer training is that we get a good level of initial response in places are filled, but on the day people drop out, sometimes without notice. Some local authorities offer funded training with no recourse if providers do not attend. And whilst this funded approach is very beneficial to the provider, where there is no incentive to pay if they and they don't attend, there's no comeback. Given that some local authorities offer funded training with a charge for non-attendance. Location and timing are crucial in encouraging providers to attend training, with evening sessions often being popular as attendees are not taken out of ratios and for childminders who may not be able to take time out of the day. We've all moved online more or less, and the use of online and virtual training has been welcomed by the sector as it reduces the time away from the setting and can be accessed at home. And it's possible this will continue after COVID-19 restrictions end. It'd be worth asking providers now about their preferences to support future planning. And for those providers most in need, initial training without any further support is not likely to be sufficient to engage or upskill them. You've talked about this already. A variety of support, including one-on-one support, may be required. So that graduated, stepped approach can be very beneficial. This could also include peer support, and it's interesting to hear from both Derby and from Bexley that there is an element of peer support within the models that they are delivering currently. Providers that already have sound business skills could support smaller, less able providers. And it can be useful to think about how this can be achieved and what would incentivise those peers to engage. But at that point, I'm going to hand back over to James for the final Q&A session.
Thank you, Barbara. I mean, today we really aimed to do lots of different things. We wanted to talk about what we would recommend in terms of an approach, and we've developed that as the business map process. We wanted to talk about the resources linked to that structure, and those that are available out in the world already. Increase people's confidence a little around how business support can be integrated into all work with providers, but also how to to learn and to hear from examples around how 4 or 5 local authorities had structured their plans to do that, to support business planning and financial planning. I think the second half has been packed full of advice and lots of real life examples around what people have been doing. We must, of course, recognise there's been an incredible amount of contact with providers over this year, all focused on business support, and we are in awe of the work that has been done by all local authorities to support providers. And I think it might not feel like it this week, but provider and local authority relationships have been fantastic this year, and I would urge you all to remind your sectors all of the work that you've been doing over the past few months, and starting to talk about how you might organise your business support moving forward. I guess to all of the panel, I think there's probably a killer question that lots of people would be asking, and that is, time is tight, resource is under demand. What are the essential elements of business support that everybody could or should be doing? You know, what is the basic? What can we not move forward without? Jo, would you like to kick us off?
I think everyone being clear, or a way of disseminating, and we've done it regularly, a variety of different policy implementation, but it's around reminding everybody that the tools that are out there. This is one of many tools that providers can use, but I suppose I always have to come back to that differentiated approach, that for some providers, they will be able to take the local authority tool, take whatever is out there, run with it and be able to move that forward. But there will be an element of additional support provided. Now that can be done on in some level of mass by doing the action learning set approach, where you can reach a number of providers at the same time, but the actions still become their actions. The local authority role is about dissemination, information and facilitation. the providers take on the actions and the responsibility. And actually the action plans, if they are interlinked and woven with some of the data collection that's going on as well, can actually then potentially feed into that side of it. It's about how these things can be interwoven together. Rather than having two business tools, is there an opportunity to create one business tool that does this job on an annual basis, but also informs sufficiency and market health?
Okay, thank you. I wonder if Tracy or Sarah or Heather or Layla have any comments about what's the core, basic, essential. All of you are on mute and I can't. Oh, Tracy, it looks like you might be about to answer that question.
I am, but I don't know if you can see me. Can you hear me?
We can hear
Yes,
you.
we can.
Oh, that's good. That's good enough then. I think us as officers in Bexley is knowing their settings really well and having that good relationship with them to be able to talk the nitty-gritty bit about money. Nobody likes talking about it, but I think that's one of the good things, is having that good relationship with the settings and knowing like their past history and what's coming up. So yeah. That's
building the
one thing for me.
building the relationship, trust, which are skills in themselves, aren't they? And open and honest relationship, I think, as I referenced, I think the relationships that you have might be under strain at the moment, but I'm sure they will recover and return. You know, I've heard examples about difficult conversations with providers, but then half an hour later, another conversation with the same provider acknowledging they just had a difficult conversation and they still like each other. Heather, have you got anything to add?
No. I think, like you say, clear information, having the tools. I think it's about being firmer. We've got to be cruel to be kind. I think we have got to, going forward, make sure that those tools go into proper action plans and that they develop them. I think my criticism of myself would be that I've done too much for them. So it's about taking that next level of accountability with them, which I think we've been in the past, probably certainly in Derby, made it slightly too easy for them.
Well, I think I don't think anybody can be criticised for being generous and proactive with support, but it does have a value, doesn't it? And I particularly enjoyed Barbara's session towards the end around the approaches and the value and motivating providers to access it, because it does have an enormous value and benefit, but we also understand that the competing demands on people's time. Yeah. There's been a couple of questions perhaps around whether Sarah in Gloucestershire would share some of those questions that you're asking providers about their business needs. I noticed you've gone off mute, Sarah, so I wonder if you've got anything to add.
Yes, certainly. I'll have a look at that and we'll see what we can do around that. We did adapt the second survey that went out slightly, but it was just revisiting really. And we are very reliant on the sector sharing some, you know, real detail with us, and you know, we thank them for doing that. But in order for us to support, they need to have that trust, as you say, James. And you know, I think that, you know, moving forward with the sector, what do they need from us? They need, you know, us to be non-judgmental, support them in such a way that, you know, I think it was said earlier, what you can do, what you're able to do, and why you're not doing it, because very often, you know, the providers are perfectly capable of doing it. It's just somebody there to give them that confidence to support them to do that and feedback. So yes, I think it is about the confidence, and it is definitely about those relationships and you know, forging those the best way you possibly can.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else before we move on to another issue? No. Okay. Right. Well, we are coming towards the end of today's session. So, what might we do next? Well, clearly we've been promoting the new resources that that we're able to share as part of this webinar. We've just asked Gloucestershire if they would share their questions to providers around how they collect business information. I would urge anybody else with anything useful to share to either send that to us so that we can attach it as an example on our next local authority update email, or you might want to upload things onto the Childcare Works, the old Childcare Works Knowledge Hub, or even the LGA Knowledge Hub site. There are ways in which we can share that information to help each other. Do please continue to promote the provider webinar that will be happening next Tuesday, the 19th of January. We have sent out on a few occasions the joining instructions and the link for you to share with your providers. It's also been in the sector press and shared on social media. But if you do want to promote provider attendance, do get in touch if you've not reached any, if none of that information has reached you. We'll probably, more than likely, schedule an informal coffee break session in the next few weeks to revisit the things that we talked about today, and to find out how things are going and if there's any further support needs. I can confirm that we'll be sharing a recording of today's webinar and the Q&A if there are some frequently asked questions there. I know some of you have been asking about this business support qualification, something that we accessed as a business. We've had 2 members of staff attend that training delivered by Jackie at Flourishing People. I can see that many of you are talking about that in the chat. I would very much like to thank everybody for participating today. The chat's been very active, which has been good to see, and you've been talking with each other. Thank you very much to Joe for preparing today's session, and for Barbara for your facilitation support, and brilliant examples from Bexley, Derby, Portsmouth and Gloucestershire. Thank you to Tracy, Heather, Layla and Sarah for that. We very much, I was fascinated by your local delivery and experiences. Right at the end of today's webinar, you will get a link to the online survey, 2 or 3 questions, very quick, and then then there's a link for you to be able to download your copy of the business map and the slides and the notes from today. And again, a reminder that we will keep you in the loop with what's happening with the provider webinar and the outcomes from that throughout. So a good afternoon's work to really think about, I think, a timely review and refresh around the business support that we do and that we have done, and what advice there might be for us to think about how we develop our frameworks for the future. So thank you everybody, brilliant to be working with you this afternoon, and thank you very much.